Before we start into the text, I want to say how surprised I am to see anybody here tonight. Of course, most people who are coming from the Western tradition would say, well, we come every Friday night, why would we not come? But then at Christmas, you don't show up. And then people from the Asian tradition, this is a big celebration. Today is New Year's. So you would be at home eating, celebrating. I know you're not here, that's why I'm saying I'm surprised. So for some reason, there's quite a few people, more than I expected, to come on what's called Chinese New Year's. On the other hand, it's probably a great time and place to celebrate the New Year's, at least in the Buddhist sense. Because in the Buddhist sense, it really doesn't have anything to do with the calendar, it has everything to do with the state of mind. So that if you actually take advantage of the existential moment to renew, to become something different in thought after thought, it's every day's New Year, every thought's New Year. On the other hand, if nothing changes between today and tomorrow, it's hard to see why this would be new or something starting over again. So it's like the New Year seems to be just a superficial celebration of something, but you could actually turn it into something more meaningful if you kind of grasp the heart of this teaching, which is going to come out tonight's passage, that every moment is an opportunity to change, to recover this true sense of one's own nature, and to start over. And so, in that spirit, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. I don't know how to say it in Chinese, so okay.
新年快乐.
Okay. 新年快乐. And I think the le is happy, right?
快乐.
Okay. 快乐 is happy. Okay. Okay. I hope you're happy at the beginning, in the middle, and the end of tonight. We're actually in the chapter called The Direct and Gradual, which is chapter 8, page 91. And I'm going to sort of bridge over from last week's and then go through and read this passage. As I said last week, I myself consider this to be a really key passage of this whole text, and I think a key passage of what we call Buddhism or Buddha Dharma. And in this case, the situation is really wonderful because this disciple, who's not quite a disciple, who's kind of questioning, looking, searching, comes to this teacher, Hui Neng, who's said to be accomplished the way. He's had a profound awakening and can teach. And yet, when he's asked by this young person, young man, the monk who's coming, will he teach me? He says, I have nothing to teach you. And then it seems as if we're in a impasse. But in that very unpacking of what he means, I have nothing to teach you, I think we get into the heart of what the teaching actually is. And that's why we start in the middle. The Master said, if I had a teaching to give others, I would be deceiving you. Depending on the situation, I merely use expedients to untie people's bonds and provisionally call it samadhi. Your master, referring to this Zhi Cheng who came from another teacher, your master, he's explaining your teacher, not myself, explains morality, concentration, and wisdom. His explanations are truly wonderful. But I see morality, concentration, and wisdom somewhat differently. Then, so he presents something. First of all, he doesn't dismiss his teacher's, the student's teacher. He says his teaching is really wonderful. And by this morality, concentration, and wisdom is sort of presented at the heart of the methodology of Buddhist learning and transformation. It's called the 3 non-outflow studies, and basically it means that you take your thoughts, your emotions, your energy, your focus, and you examine it very carefully. And it said you return the light to illumine within. So you use non-outflow means instead of letting the mind and the nature and the body and the emotions just flow out in a continuous sensory circus of sorts, where you're just chasing, sort of like channel surfing through the sixth sense objects with the sex origin, this kind of thing. You actually restrain those, temporarily restrain them so that you can bring them back to center, to focus. It is not a restraint that's a repression, but rather a reining in to bring them into a kind of harness that allows you then to deeply see what's going on the deeper levels of your mind and your nature. So this is called returning the light. It's why it's called non-outflow, because it's a bringing back of one's essential energy and mental acuity to look into one's life. Meditation is in a sense, and that's the second one, morality, concentration. Sometimes the second one is basically talking about the contemplative practice of meditation. But any spiritual practice that brings attention and focus to a single attention is a form of this. And when you're doing that, it's not so much you're bringing it to a single attention as what you're not doing by scattering in 100 different directions. So again, it's kind of deceptive because the goal is not to just have a single-minded attention, it's to stop the distraction. And by stopping that distraction, even momentarily, insight can start to happen. And that's the third one, which is the what's trend here is wisdom. So it's Shila, Samadhi, Prajna, or morality, concentration, and wisdom. And this wisdom is referring to, sometimes it's called insight. Insight beyond just a kind of knowledge, but a deep insight into who you are, what you're about, and how things really work. So this is the method. But what the Great Master Hui Neng says here is that this is it, and the way your teacher explains it is wonderful. It's not off. He's referring to the previous passage where he described their training in this school of thought, the three non-outflow learning. But he says, I explain it somewhat differently. So he's not saying that what he teaches is wrong. He just says his is a little different, and the way it's different is interesting. He says, and Jer Chung doesn't get it. He says, look, there's just morality, concentration, and wisdom. That's his next line. There can only be one kind of morality, concentration, and wisdom. How can there be a difference? Okay, so this is, he's got the student's attention. And the student's been practicing this for a long time. And yet he's told, although it's wonderful, it's not ultimate. Although it may be necessary, it's not sufficient. And so now he's a little bit on the edge. Maybe a lot on the edge, I don't know. And the master says, now he goes into it. And this is somewhat difficult to unpack. Your masters, meaning Shensho's morality and concentration, are meant for great vehicle practitioners. My morality and concentration and wisdom are meant for those of the supreme vehicle. So he's just, you could basically see he's just saying, he's not saying it's necessarily better, it's meant for a different capacity. I think that's where we'd want to go with this. In other words, he's not fighting and saying that his is an inferior. He says it's wonderful. But rather what he's saying is, the one I'm going to pass on to you, which is the and he says, I have no teaching, so this is pretty ironic, because now he's in a bind. I'm going to teach you something, even though I just said I have no teaching. So how is he going to resolve this little conundrum? And I think one of the ways we have to understand he's resolving it is not to say mine is better than his, but it's meant for a different capacity. And that capacity is someone who's gotten to the point of probably doing the very basic morality, concentration, and wisdom, and now is ready to take it into the next dimension or the next level, what he calls self-nature, essential nature, morality, concentration, wisdom. So in a sense, taking it from the outside, taking it as a performed series of actions and devotions and meditation contemplations, and now working it into, it becomes actually non-dual with your person. We might call this total embodiment rather than an acquisition of morality, concentration, wisdom. Because if you could hold these precepts, and people do that when they take refuge. They vow to not kill, steal, engage in sexual misconduct, they avoid intoxicants and lying. These are Panchasila, the first five. And this forms a ground to then begin concentrating the mind, because without that control over what we're doing in these five dimensions, the mind is very, very disturbed. It can't focus because it's feeling guilt or remorse or shame or regret or covering. All these things that come with sort of harming oneself and others creates a disturbance in the psyche. And so when we sit, the waves of that are still wrestling around. They're wrestling around because they really do affect and impact things. Buddha made a statement that this intentional karma that's created doesn't go away. It just reverberates. And then when the causes and conditions are ripe, it starts to coalesce and return. And this is the idea of cause and effect. So what you're trying to do on the very basic level, in a course level, is get control over how you're impacting yourself and others through these five areas of your relationship to life. Is it liberating life or is harming life? Are you stealing or are you not? And stealing here let's go, there's degrees of this, is where the Sixth Patriarch went. At the very first, it means just not taking what doesn't belong to you. It's like, duh, this is what I learned when I was young. It took me a while to figure that out because I thought everything belonged to me when I was young, so there wasn't any stealing. But then it goes to not taking more than your share. And this is interesting because what this implies, and then stealing, there's a sensibility of taking what you need but not more, because that's taking away from the overall stock that belongs to everyone. Now you could see there's maybe an environmental ethic in this second one of stealing. If we consume more than necessary for what we need, if we overconsume, and that takes away from others who then underconsume or go wanting, it's a kind of stealing in this sense. So you could see how you start to take something just very basic and say, well, I don't steal. I use my 10 million to really enjoy myself, and and I buy all the things I want, and and I kind of dispose of them where I want, and I really don't care that my furniture is coming from endangered forests and species and so on and so forth. And I really like furs, and I wear a lot of furs. And as a man, I'm getting weak, so I want to have potency, so I'm killing all these animals that I think will give me potency, and la. And what you're doing is you're having a huge, what they call it a footprint, but I would say it's like the abominable snowman's footprint. It's a huge footprint on the environment. And you're not aware that when you splash down in this way, you are just crushing others or taking resources away. So there's a reverse form of stealing. You practice the paramita of giving. Generosity. Or you could say, well, I don't feel generous. Well, just kind of keep even then. You don't have to give it away, but don't take too much. And actually, in Buddhism, there's a phrase for that. It's called giving by reducing your share. It's very interesting. Giving by reducing your share. So you don't actually donate or give. You just cut back on how much you're consuming to that point where there's a balance. Now, you don't want to go the other extreme and not have enough. But finding that balance, finding that middle way, actually has an impact on the rest of the world. It's really interesting. Often, unless we travel outside our culture to another place, we have no idea of whether, what's enough. And so sometimes a trip to another country that's less advantaged, and that's, again, a double. Because is it really an advantage to have more? I don't know. In some ways, what I'm talking about here, having too much is as much a burden as having too little. And that's sometimes our vexation or anxiety comes not because we don't have enough, but because we have too much. The United Nations health, what would that be, health? What's the area of the United Nations concerned with health and welfare? It's not.
WHO.
The W has said that in the advanced, in the developed, and now they're saying the overdeveloped countries, the leading causes of disease and illness are not deficiencies but excesses. And in other places it's the opposite. And they're not talking just about material excesses, which is the case. So the overweight, the diabetes, the gout, the hypertension, all these sort of things related to excess, but also that the excess of things and the excess of media, entertainment, the whole thing leads to a psychic excess too. So that then most of the medications and treatment are to reduce the anxieties and stress coming from overly much rather than not enough. So it's just really an interest. Anyhow, I'm digressing, of course. Let's get back on track here. So this morality, concentration, and wisdom has different levels of doing it. When he says mind is a supreme vehicle, and yet by this he's saying the supreme vehicle is no teaching. Did you get that? I mean, it's tricky. You'd have to make this equation. If he says above, I basically have no teaching. If I said I'd have one, I'd be lying to you. And then I'm giving you the supreme vehicle, which, if my math is right logically, that would be no teaching, correct? Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. So how can the supreme vehicle, and by vehicle he doesn't mean literally vehicle, this is a metaphor, everybody, okay? So it means a method of practice. So a vehicle, and earlier on he says, vehicles, whether you call it meditation, bowing, recitation, memorization, all of these things are methods of practice, not subjects of debate. So he quickly takes it out of the realm of debate, which he's not going to do here with Shen Shou. He's not going to debate and say mine's better and yours is worse, because that would put him back into a contradiction. So he's merely saying these are methods of practice. And as methods of practice, what's the best one? Now it's New Year's, and if you stay around till 9, I'll tell you. You can put it on your visa. I'm joking, okay? What would be from this teaching, what would be the best one? What does he mean by, in other words, what does he mean by supreme? Why is it supreme? What makes it?
What works for you?
Huh?
What works for you?
This is the key. I think the key here is not that it's absolutely the best one, but it is provisionally the best one in that it works for you. So whatever works, and again we have to say works because we have to look at this. Works for you doesn't mean like, yeah, I really like it. You know, I really like sitting meditation, or I like bringing dumplings on New Year's. That's my practice. Or I like recycling stuff from my house and giving it to the monastery. That's my charity work. And this liking doesn't mean it works for you in the sense that it makes you, let's say it makes the ego comfortable. But it works in the sense of what? Untying knots, or he says untying people's bonds. So this is a therapeutic, if you will, working. It's a corrective working to untie something, rather than it works because I like it. Now you may like being untied, but in most cases, as we see in these encounters, the very area we're untied we don't see as unlike. We either see it as my identity and who I am, or we're blind to it completely. So in the area where the bonds and the knots are not either the most obvious, they're hidden from us, and thus become a source of free-floating anxiety, because we can never nail down, why am I so unhappy? Why am I so uncomfortable? Why is it, there's something off, there's something that, and I can't nail it, and it seems elusive. That's when the knot and bond is so deep that the conscious mind has blocked it. And this is called samskara, it's the fourth skandha. It's the deep habitual tendencies that we don't actually see unless they're prompted to rise to the surface and become manifest through some extreme thing. But otherwise, they're always underneath. But it's this subcurrent that's floating us along, even though we're not accessing. Or we are using these knots to set up a complete identity, a fabrication, the Buddha called it, of a false self of who we are. I am this belongs to me, and so on and so forth. And we set up, it literally says, you build this house with these kinds of attachments. And so we either don't see it or don't want to see it. In either case, the bonds are not necessarily the case. And could I emphasize this by saying, in the previous lively encounters, nobody exactly came in and said, whoa, could you untie my knot for me? right? Most of them came in and sort of like, what's up? I hear you're a patriarch. Show me your stuff. And then bit by bit, and they'd say, I heard you're a patriarch, so let me bow to you. And he'd say, you bowed? Chicken style there. You just kind of did a quick bow. Did you really bow or not bow? Oh, well, that's called arrogance. What? And then all of a sudden the knot was revealed. Oh, but he didn't come in and saying, please untie my knot of arrogance. And then somebody else came in and said, I'm a real cultivator. I think I'll come and check out this patriarch. And I've recited and memorized this text and recited 3,000 times. And so he said, and what would you like me to do? Praise you? And so all of a sudden that knot gets revealed. But what I'm trying to point out, very few of them came in with a sense that the thing that was obstructing them was apparent to them, and they really wanted treatment from the Sixth Patriarch. Some of them were troubled, but they weren't quite sure why. Their practice wasn't working, so there was something, but they really weren't aware of what it was. And others had set up a huge identity around their knot and didn't want it to be tangled with. And so he says, in both cases, that's all I do. I simply untie knots. And expediently, sometimes people call this expedient provisionally, and then some people call it kind of almost like deceptively. But I think it's more along the idea of, I give it a name, but the name is only defining the act of untying. It's not defining something, if that makes sense. So even though your knot's untied, you don't want to just say, then this is the teaching, whatever untied my knot. That's where the raft thing comes in, and once the knot's untied, you don't need to call it anything anymore. Otherwise, you could end up tying another knot attaching to that. Okay, so he says, my teaching never departs from the essential nature. Now, here's where he's saying, he's describing the difference, but before this, he says, awakening and understanding are not the same. Why does he say that? What does he mean by that? Anybody want to give a stab at that one? Awakening and understanding are not the same?
One of them has to do with analysis and the intellect.
Mm-hmm.
The other one's more grounded on what you call reality, I guess.
I think that's not, his comment was, because they can't hear you unless we turn all the cameras around, so somebody's saying, and I say, that's a great answer, and then we go on, and everybody was watching, like, what was the answer? Basically, that understanding might have to do with a cognitive intellectual capacity, where awakening is something more direct, for want of a better word, perhaps intuitive, or not mediated by thought, intellect, ideas. That could be, and I would use again the word embodied. Awakening is an embodied, transformative, total understanding of things, whereas understanding is analytical. There's still an understander and something that's understood. And sometimes it's clearly understood and sometimes it's not, but it's a toggle switch sort of thing rather than total immersion. But look at the next line, seeing may come slowly or immediately. Now why is that backing up the previous statement? Awakening and understanding are not the same. Seeing may come slowly and immediately. Any ventures? Did you remember where this word was used before? Jian, seen, in the text. Hint, hint. Okay, so let me take you back on what you already know. As Plato said, all learning is remembering, so here we're going to remember and then think we learned something. We went back, and he comes into the fifth patriarch, gives him this teaching. Well, it doesn't give him the teaching, confirms that he understands it. He goes off, and he begins his first teaching. And where he goes, the guy asks him, I'm going to use the guy, because if I give you a name, you won't remember. The guy asks him, what did you get? What were you taught? What was passed on and transmitted? He says, nothing. We only discussed seen, jian. Okay, he uses that word. So to what he's talking about, in the awakened state, there's no knowledge transfer. There's no transfer to others. It's just a mutual seeing things as they really are and affirming that. So you really couldn't take a test on this if you thought about a knowledge-based test, multiple choice or otherwise. It wouldn't work. because it's just seen. So here we have it again, and I think what he's saying is awakening is seen, whereas knowledge is understanding, and it's not directly seen. It's mediated by thoughts, ideas, analysis, and so forth. Work, not work for you? Yes.
Just a quick question. So, do you think that it talks about it coming slowly or immediately? Does that mean that seeing is just like up to, I don't know, timing dynamics?
So what is seeing up to? This is a very good point. Like, it could be, it comes slowly or immediately, like, oh, there it is, or it's like nothing to do with me. It's just a happenstance. I don't think that's what he's saying. What he's saying is depending on your potentials, your roots and conditions, sometimes called your good roots. In other words, your spiritual foundation that's accumulated through all of the things you do with body and mouth and mind creates a foundation. And once that foundation is solid, something can happen that allows you to see through very quickly the nature of things. Whereas it could be slowly, not because you're not smart, but because the mind is cluttered by attachments and confusion and a dissolute kind of conscience. And therefore, this, even though it's right there before your eyes, you don't see it. So the seeing he's talking about is not some mystical transcendence, but it's actually a result of an opening and clarity of your mind and your nature. And so it's like the seeing happens on the basis of what your dispositions and your potentials are. But it's not something, oh, you've studied harder, you'll get it. Or that some people are magical because they get it quickly. It simply means, you could say, the waters of the mind, when they settle, the moon perfectly reflected. The moon is always there to be reflected, but it's seen or quickly depends on how those waters calm. If your waters are naturally calm, you're naturally not inclined to harm, to kill, to steal, to manipulate people sexually and so forth. Then all of it, it's there. If your waters aren't calm, you can't imagine why somebody's seeing what they're seeing, because all you're seeing is these. So that's what I think he's getting at here. Seeing, and what he says can come slowly or quickly, is talking about, for him, for example, you remember he's out and he hears he's a woodcutter and he hears this person say, let the mind be unattached, clinging to nothing, from the Vajra Sutra. And very immediately, he has a scene, he has an awakening. Now, we can imagine that in that same shop, at the same time, there are a lot of customers. I mean, you're at Costco, all right, and you're checking out. And somebody in the line says, oh, let the mind be unattached, clinging to nothing. How many people go, wow, where did you learn that? Wow, they drop their groceries and say, I want to go where you got that. Most people say, could you stop babbling and get your stuff checked out? There may be one person there. Maybe the checkout person says, stop scanning, and goes, what did you just say? Let your mind be unattached, clinging to nothing. And she stops, right? Where did you hear that? Where did you? And everybody in line is going, come on, man, I'm trying to check out here. That's a slow, it could be slow or fast. Do you know in your own life, sometimes at some moment, you hear something and it resonates. There may be 100 people around here and it doesn't resonate with them, but for you, could be you're watching a movie and one line in the movie strikes you, you're reading a poem, one line in the poem. Or you're even going to an art thing and one image or one sound of music, all of a sudden there's this resonance. And not anybody else is hearing it or seeing it or feeling it in the same way. So this kind of capacity, it's said that we have the capacity to hear and see and know it totally. That's called Buddha. But we only have limited access because we cover or we twist, or we could use his, we knot up that potential. And therefore, it could be quick or slow depending on this. But it's not referring to sort of intellect per se. And so I think, and then he says, listen to my explanation. And now he's going to go into, my teaching never departs from the essential nature. It says the Sixth Patriarch and all great teachers teach to the essential nature and from the essential nature. That's why he doesn't have to have a great deal of scholastic learning, even though he knows text. He doesn't have to have a great amount of scholastic learning to teach from the essential nature. Nor does somebody have to have a great amount of knowledge and learning to be taught to the essential nature. Now, they say it's mind to mind or heart to heart, but to me, this sounds a little, I don't know what the word, I heard it kind of like esoteric, like psychic transmission. Heart to heart, mind. It was the teaching directly from the mind to the mind. But I think what it's referring here is to the nature. It's the deep essential nature talking to the deep essential nature beyond even words and language themselves. Words and language be used to catalyze that insight. So I think this is talking about a depth of true talk to the true nature that isn't even caught up in particular teachings per se. And that's what I think he's saying. I never depart from the essential nature. To depart from the essential nature and explain the Dharma is teaching superficially. And this only leads to confusion. Why does it lead to confusion if you don't teach to that space? Why does he say that?
Because the Dharma is not fixed. It changes, the lesson changes depending on where you are.
It's true, the Dharma's not fixed, and it could change depending on who you are. So if you're not teaching to that, it could be confusing. For example, if you need to know about, if I'm the doctor, and I see, you need to really know about clearing your conscience, we don't need to talk about meditation and wisdom. You really have to get right with yourself and other people. How can you be selling drugs and ripping people off and think you're going to meditate and get to be But somebody else, that might not be necessary. So that's one answer, but I think there's more to it than that. Why is it confusing only teaching in this way? What does he mean by superficially? And not teaching to the nature. Venture, I guess. It's New Year's. If you make a mistake, tomorrow's another day. Come on.
Well, it gets back again to being a, quote, teaching, where you have maybe sayings and words and things that get set in stone, and then things that get argued over.
And then you argue over, and it could be confusing because you heard this here this night and there the next night, and since it never really penetrated, you don't know what's right, and then you throw the I Ching to, maybe that'll help me figure it out, right? But there's more even. I think there's more to that.
Would it be that anything that is not inherently natural or inherent nature is, by definition, delusional? I mean, like...
Is what?
Delusional, like somewhat of an illusion. I can't help but to think of, like, the way we operate in society with all our constructs and all these norms and things.
Mm-hmm.
And how that, in and of itself, just feels not, that there could be a more real reality per se than what we have now.
Yeah, I think we're certain. Let's put it this. I'm going to use a metaphor. Teaching to and from the nature is hitting the nail on the head. I'm going to use one of my Midwestern, and that took me a long time to do that, by the way. Hitting the nail on the head, you think is really easy? And some of you are like, what's the nail, what's the head, what's hitting it? Because you're in the virtual digital age, you never held a hammer, you never pounded a nail. So if you go out, and I was going to make, what was I going to make? I was going to make a birdhouse for my mother. And my dad said, make sure you just hit the nail on the head and it'll come out okay. And then you start, and even to hit the nail with the hammer is a pretty much of a miracle at 6 years old. And then to hit it so it doesn't do this. And then you try to straighten it out, and you try to straighten out, then the wood rips, and you do it again, and where are you going? Buy some more nails. Really? Well, okay, they're all bent, the wood's cracked, man. So to actually hit it square so it goes in without bending is a bit of an art. And it can be used as a Chan expression, means you are direct and hitting it square. It's the sound of the nail being hit on the head. It's boom. It's like ink. And so what this could mean by the way, the birdhouse that I was going to make my mother turned out, she wouldn't throw it out because she was my mother. And she wouldn't let me feel as if I didn't create a masterpiece. So, and then I painted it a horrible pink, and it turned out to be the toilet brush holder in the bathroom. When I came home at 35 years old, it was still there. As ugly as it was when I was 6. Anyhow, so hitting the nail on the head means you go directly to something. And I think when he says he's teaching to and from the nature, he's going right to the human of you, right to your heart. Where is it that you are? Not where you'd like to be intellectually or philosophically, or as a Dharma teacher, understanding. Where are you right now in the sense of your nature, of your mind and your emotions and your attachments? Know them, understand them. That's where the knots are. That's where the liberation is. So a good teacher will just sort of say, so, what's up? And you no, what's up? What is going on right now in you at this moment? Where are your thoughts? Where are your feelings? Where are your delusions? Where is your wholesome? And taking stock. So it's right to the person, right to their existential heart. That is, means teaching to the nature. And so, but that nature is universal. It's called the Buddha nature because from that nature, Buddhas come. We have that potential. But all the distortions come from that nature too, all the knots, so to speak. So the teacher is going right to your nature as it is manifesting in that condition at that time. And is going directly there, no place else. It's not interesting if I talk to you about his nature. I mean, it could be interesting. You could probably write some, I don't know. You might be able to write a kind of good novel on that, a bestseller. It depends on where his nature is. Could be really interesting. But it doesn't help you release your knots. And talking hers to yours doesn't help. So it's where the knots are in the nature. This is really beautiful. There's a passage I won't do tonight, but I brought it out and might get it. There's this wonderful section from the Shurangama Sutra where the Buddha takes this beautiful long silken scarf and then he ties it in a knot. And then he ties it in another knot. And he's asking Ananda, what's going on here? And Ananda says, you're taking the scarf and tying it into knots. And he said, in the same way, this scarf is the matrix of the thus come one. It's your Buddha nature whole and complete. And with every confused, delusional activity of your 6 sense organs, you tie this in a knot. It's still the nature, it's still there, but now it's tied in these knots. And then he goes through this process of saying, so, your liberation consists of knowing to untie these knots. And of course, Ananda and the Buddha goes, how about this? Does that untie the knot? Stressing and pulling on it. Ananda says, no. He says, oh, do you have to let go and unloosen the knot? Aha. So he says, unless you know how to untie the knot, you won't, how it was tied in the first place, you won't. This is how it's teaching to the nature. It's going to, where is your knot? So the thing here to ask isn't, so the supreme vehicle is the vehicle that addresses your knot. Whoa. That's what makes it supreme. And it goes right in to the heart of things. Sometimes that's a little hard to take. We'd rather have a massage first, and then a certain amount of anesthesia, and then maybe touch at it. So this is where I think he's going. I want to stop here and just make a side commentary on this a little bit and say something, because something happened today. I don't know what to say about it, so I'm going to ask Franklin to say something about it, what can be said about it, because I would probably say what I shouldn't say about it. So let me go on. Well, you can erase it if I say it. So if I start to say something I shouldn't, then Franklin should scream out, stop. Okay.
You should stop broadcasting.
How's that?
Yeah, everyone says to stop podcasting. Now can we do that?
Oh.
Broadcast.
You're gonna be very bummed out.
How many people are there?
There's like 25 people listening.
Oh. You have to, you can say this community, virtual community.
Maybe after we transfer.
Oh, okay. Well, so we're gonna stop here for the night, at least at least camera-wise. But what I was going to say will be able to be said in.
You can say it's technically a UFBU.
Let me just say what I'm going to say. Don't turn it off yet. So let me just introduce by saying, no, don't worry. I'll be skillful. You have to remember that I came through the Catholic school system, and beating around the bush and not saying exactly straight on is an art that I learned to survive. Okay? Subterfuge, it's called in another language. When my teacher first came to the United States in the 60s, middle to late, well, actually the later 60s, and came along with other teachers from Asia, and it came because the Immigration Restriction Act had been lifted then. So up to that time, there was a quota on the amount of people who come from abroad, especially from Asia. When that got lifted, I think 67, 68. And then given what was going on in Asia, a lot of turmoil and revolution and war, many teachers came to the United States and tried to bring in what we call Buddhism, or I would say the teachings of the Dharma. And many forms came in simultaneously at that time. When I encountered it in the late 60s, I basically met with three forms. Now, some people, I'm not trying to say this is all that existed, but these are the three that are available. There were what we called ethnic temples. There'd be a Vietnamese temple, or a Japanese temple, or a Chinese temple, or a Thai temple. And having read about Zen in college, I would go to the temples, and I could make no connection between what I read in the Zen book and what was going on there. First of all, it was usually all in the indigenous language of the temple. So it was either Thai or Burmese or Chinese or Japanese. And much of it was what I associated with standard religious practice, a lot of icons and images and devotions and rituals. Very little teaching or classes that were going on. And actually very little meditation. And it seemed like the only people coming were people coming from a cultural identity to the temple to carry on cultural identities. Then the next place I could look for it was in education, like universities would have classes, Buddhist classes. But again, for me, it was very dry and abstract. It was basically studying it through the lenses of anthropology or history or comparative philology or something. And it was very much arm's length. It was basically learning about them, mostly. Learning about them and not actually learning from them. That wasn't there. Much less learning through them. So that was kind of interesting, but it was still, as this text would say, understanding but not awakening. It was knowledge, and it was interesting, kind of, but it didn't penetrate, it didn't absorb into a transformative. It was informative but not transformative. And I was kind of looking for both. And so then the other possibility for me at the time was places that just devoted themselves to what they called Zen or sitting. And I could go to those places and I could just sit on a cushion for a long period of time. Not a whole lot of instruction, and certainly not a whole lot of study of the text. You maybe have one or two texts that they would kind of quote, but most of it was just a kind of meditation. So those three were, for a long time, was out there. So one of the things my teacher was trying to do was to bring understanding and awakening, I'm going back to this passage tonight, into a one system, one model, not having them as two, but having them as one. And with the idea that the understanding is necessary, but it's not sufficient. You need the other understanding. You need to study these texts deeply and sincerely and seriously as the prerequisites for practice, to guide the practice. They will help guide the practice. And then the practice done in that sense, done seriously with the guidance of these, will shed light on those texts again. And there begins a reciprocal relationship where the teaching, the understanding of it, understanding with the idea, not just dilettantish cocktail party understanding, like, did you know the Buddha said everything's empty? Really, you know, but kind of you knew there was something there, but you weren't going to get at it just through the intellectual you would have to go through some transformative contemplative practice, and all of a sudden then you get what that means. You would eat it, you would absorb it. And so that blend is what he was trying to do at all times. And so when we went to study with him, it was translation, going into these texts, more text and deeply, and working on them, and at the same time that, like, what's up? What are you doing? What sutra are you studying? Oh, I'm studying the Shara. No. What sutra are you reciting right now in your mind? And it's like, famous. I want to be famous. I got to be famous. So that's your sutra. So he would go back and forth like this. He said, so you can study the sutra to correct the sutra you're studying now, but you better understand the sutra you're studying now, or you'll never understand this one. Oh, and so all of a sudden, this blend of study and practice started to really come alive. It was so alive and so existential, you didn't notice that you were in a mattress factory in the Mission District where there was no heating, the food was lousy, and there was just a lot of strange people around. Now, strange people, I meant a lot of Asians that I had never really rubbed shoulders with, but other strange people from the 60s. I'm not going to go into detail, but they're all there together, and it's like, what held them together? This kind of existential strange. The Chinese came and said, wow, who are these weird Westerners, and why are they here? And the teacher would just say, actually, your understanding of Chinese Buddhism has polluted you against the true meaning. You have to become almost childlike again to get at this. And you can't come seeking blessings and long life and that whole thing, And then to the Westerners, you say, you guys are totally unruly. First, you got to start holding some, what are precepts? Rules. Oh, no, man, we don't know. You got to start holding some rules. And by the way, how are you towards your family and your parents? Oh, like we left them, man. We got on our motorcycles and left them. Man. Well, you might consider in doing that you cut off some of your roots of being a person. What? Whoa. And so from the Chinese who were overly filial to the point of not thinking for themselves, he would say, you need to think things over. And to us who were like, you need to be filial. And so there again, what was the supreme teaching? What was needed for each group? And so this thing sort of emerged. And then in 1976, when I came in, he said what we need to do in the world, in the modern world today, and especially as America, that this Dharma is not going to come into the modern world except through education. It's not going to come just through seminaries, and it's not going to come through just temples. It's going to have to come through a transformative learning experience where this teaching both influences and responds to modern science, technology, engineering, and so forth, and has this interaction at a deep level. Therefore, you have to have an educational system that understands all those modalities and paradigms, and at the same time can bring the fresh insight and wisdom of these to it to have a really enriching dialogue. And so he says, start a university. Oh, okay. So it was like 1976, yeah, we go, we want to start a university. What's the model? Well, no, that's theological. Oh, well, then we want to do it. Well, that's kind of academic. Yeah. So we come back to the teacher, and he said, well, we're going to do this academic. He says, well, where's the heart? Where's the transform? Oh, yeah, we forgot that. Okay, so let's go back, and we're going to do it. And then the accrediting people say, well, that's a theological model. And we could never get the two together. And the teacher would not let us give up the heart of this to conform just to the model, and yet not just leave the model to do that. So for a long time, all of us who are trying to do this were caught between these two and not able, and I think possibly in the last 7 or 8 years, we've been able, I think, as a group, to bring together a model that has both of these in a blend that is not only acceptable, but I think exciting. It's not giving up the academic and the serious study, nor is it giving up the transformative. So it's seeing it as a total way of engaging in a knowledge that's not only informing but transforming, that actually changes the whole ground from which you see reality and so forth. So basically what we've been doing, how long now, the last 7, 8, 9 years, tweaking this, moving it along, and then making an attempt to get this accredited in the larger structure of higher education in America, not simply as a theological model and not simply as a vocational accreditation, but the primary accreditation that goes to all universities. And a few years ago, I think the most transformative was the accrediting body for the area, which is recognized the model. We put forth a model that says this is what we want to do, and they accepted it. That was the major breakthrough, because it wasn't an either or. It was saying this has legitimacy in its own right and could be. And then the next stage was we got candidacy, right? Now, what did that mean?
That means